Okay, welcome everybody to the Thursday, March 16th Envision Eugene Technical Advisory Committee. I'm John Borowski. I'll be chairing the meeting tonight in place of Tiffany Edwards. She can't be here tonight. We start off with our Zoom protocols. Is there anybody in the waiting room, Elena?
There is. We do have John Quetzalcoatl here tonight again.
Okay, well, Zoom protocols are basically don't use the chat so that we have a record of this. Don't be mean. I'll leave it at that.
Sounds good.
Agenda review. Does anybody have any additions or subtractions from the agenda at this point?
I have an update. I noticed that it said approval of 219 Zoom minutes, but it should say 216. Yeah, that's it.
Okay, so that's the only adjustment to that. So then the next action item would be the approval of those 2/16/22 Zoom meeting minutes. Does someone want to make a motion to that?
Yeah, it should be June 16, 23.
2/16/23.
Yep, just totally just all wrong. Yes.
I
Okay,
move approval.
thank you. Second. All right, all in favor, say aye.
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 Aye. Next up on the agenda is public comment. At this point, we will accept public comment. Is there anybody with their hand raised in the attendees spot?
John's here, but his hand is not raised.
All
So
right, John, this would be your opportunity. If you'd like to make a public comment, raise your hand. Otherwise, just come along for the ride.
No hand raised.
No hand raised. All right, then that means we are already 15 minutes ahead of schedule. We're going to move on to the growth monitoring annual report data. And the first item is the key housing development data. And this will be Elena.
Yeah, before I jump in, I just wanted to remind everyone, sort of in response to Mark's email a little bit, that these materials that we've shared with you aren't the annual report. They're sort of more comprehensive. We had talked about showing you all sort of the more in-depth review data, but we'll be sort of repackaging that all as we actually put the annual report together for more of like a public facing report. So just wanted to start off with that. And then I will share my screen.
Can I just add to that, Elena? Thanks for remembering to do that. I appreciate it. We also talked at this group that, like Elena said, that is these are really the appendices, right? Updated. And so we, just as a reminder for the annual report, it's going to be more like a report card. There's not going to be a lot of analysis in there, a lot of discussion. So we can talk later at this group, like you said, Mark, what are next steps? We did a little bit of that in the comprehensive report under the recommendations section. That's where we really got to next steps. What do we do with this information, right? What are the things that the information said we needed to look out for? So we can circle back with that. But so we want to make sure, we heard you, and just also a reminder that the annual report is going to be really tiny in comparison to what we did last time.
All right. Let me find. Okay. So last time we went over some housing numbers and housing mix. And so we're going to continue with housing development tonight and talk about efficiency measures and BLI impact data. And so this is the first snip of some of those housing efficiency measures. Generally, high level downtown programs are on pace. R2 zone density change is on pace. redesignation to low density residential is below pace. Affordable housing land bank sites has been met. Accessory dwellings are above pace, and middle housing is still TBD because we've just started monitoring that. So that's kind of a big picture overview. The efficiency measures that we have listed here and gone into detail about what those efficiency measures mean have all stayed the same since the comprehensive report, except for the addition of the middle housing code amendments. So those were amended in effective June 30th. And so that removes some regulatory barriers to building those housing types. So we will be comparing sort of pre code amendments and post code amendments there. So that was the added addition in efficiency measures. And so I'm going to struggle a little bit on like how much detail to go into with each thing. So flag for me if you want me to go into more detail, or pause if you have questions. But so the preliminary calculations on the dwellings from efficiency measure chart don't include all of the efficiency measures that we list out. So we had to, because we have to do some manual calculation for some of them. But generally, the number of efficiency measure dwellings was slightly higher on average during the monitoring period than we forecast. So you can see this is the average to date, which was 202 per year, as opposed to the forecast, which was 165 dwellings per year. And I'm just gonna keep going. Then we go into efficiency measure dwellings by plan designation. There is a question flagged here that last time Sue had brought up, there was a specific paragraph that kind of went into a lot of detail that pontificated a little bit about what it would or wouldn't mean if the trend was met. And so we do have a number of statements that usually say, you know, if the trend continued through 2032, the total dwellings from the types of efficiency measures in this chart would exceed the forecast need. So that doesn't go into quite as much detail as the paragraph she had flagged last time, but just kind of wanted to get people's temperature on whether statements like that, how statements like that feel. So we could leave as is, we could change it to be less specific, to say something like, they're just higher on average than projected, or is more than projected for this point in the monitoring period, as opposed to jumping ahead to 2032. Don't know if anyone has thoughts on that at the moment.
And I can't see everybody, so if you want to jump in, please just jump in.
We can also come back to it if we need to. Oh, Rick, you're muted. Rick, I can't hear you.
Now can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay. I think Sue's point, and I agreed with, is the report is supposed to kind of lay out the data and not kind of throw comments in about what might go on in the future, because we really don't know what goes on in the future. And so I think that statements like this just ought to be left out, other than if you want to say we're a little ahead of what we projected, and just leave it at that. It seems to me that we shouldn't be drawing conclusions like this one represents, because we really don't know where we're going to go from here. I mean, the banking industry just is starting to collapse around us again, and we may not have any construction over the next 5 years. So it's kind of, you're trying to read a crystal ball, I think, when you try to make comments like this. My 2 cents.
Thanks.
Elena, can you scroll down a little bit to show where the trend is in the chart?
Yes.
Thanks. So almost all of our charts, I think, have that trend bar. So that's essentially what those trend statements are doing, is explaining that bar. So I just want to, it's the middle bar in, for instance, on the right, or you can hover over it, Elena. It's always that middle bar that basically says, you know, on the left is the bar that's happened over the monitoring period. On the middle is the bar that if what happened on the left continues for 20 years, then that's what would happen. And then on the far right is the adopted forecast, so that you can kind of compare all of those things. So I just wanted to point that out, as far as we certainly don't have to include those trend statements in there, but that's what it's referring to. So.
All right. Oh, looks like Lisa's hand is raised.
Yeah, thank you for that explanation, Heather. And I'm okay with leaving in that highlighted sentence you had. I feel it's helpful actually to explain the data. So I would support leaving it in. Just my 2 cents.
Thank you. Okay, well, I'll keep moving forward for now. And so this is efficiency measure dwellings by BLI plan designation. As I mentioned, we did have to do some manual analysis because it isn't quite in our warehousing system. And yeah, we just have to manually analyze some of it. So that included the addition of R2, the redesignation, and accessory dwelling units. And so this chart, we have added the dashed line, which shows with the addition of the manual analysis. And so this chart essentially shows that both medium density residential and high density residential lands, the need has already been achieved here and here above what is forecast. And then on commercial lands, it is pretty much on track to meet this forecast. And then on low density residential land, it's about 50% slower at this point than it would need to be to meet the forecast. Keep going. Dwellings by efficiency measure and plan designation.
Hey, Elena,
Yep.
I noticed Lisa's, your hand is up. Is that
Oh, I think
left
I was-
over? Okay, I
think
just
it's
wanted to
left
make
over.
sure.
So before you move on from that last chart, and forgive me if I don't have my numbers right, but it seemed to me that on the commercial, that that's where a lot of those big multifamilies were being built, was on commercial land. And so I thought we had exceeded the number of multi-unit
This-
dwellings.
This is just for dwellings that have used efficiency measures. So is that where your brain was at?
So what was the efficiency measure on commercial then? Would that just be MUPD?
Off of the top of my head, it would be, well,
Being
Actually, if-
downtown,
yeah, I was gonna say, actually, if I move down a little bit. So it looks like, yeah, like LRPD has some commercial uses.
Okay.
Well, sorry, commercial land. And then downtown as well. And then also, yeah, this is downtown MUPD, student housing.
So that, just by building in downtown, that was considered an efficiency because it has lower parking requirements and those types of things. Is that how it got qualified as an efficiency? I mean, I'm trying to think back to 2012 when we did that. I mean, I know we designated a number of units that we wanted downtown, but I
Yeah,
just can't remember what the efficiency of other than MUPTI was.
It was programmatic, so it was MUPTI was the big one, but you're right, we did amend the code to make it easier to develop downtown. We already have no parking requirements downtown, so that wasn't new, but we did amend the code to make it easier specifically to do housing downtown. And then we also talk about the facilitated approach that we take. We have a staff that really focus on development and activity downtown. And so there's a, like a staff liaison
Right.
approach to development downtown as well. So it's kind of all together. That's why we called it the programmatic approach.
Okay, yeah, I just saw that 1,500 and I thought we've developed quite a few more than that on commercial, so I just wasn't sure about that. Thank you, Bill.
Again, like the downtown efficiency measures, they include, but are not, it's not exclusive to projects that have received a MUPTI. Is that correct?
right, correct. That is
And
correct.
how many, I mean, I'm curious as to how much housing development there's been that downtown that has not gotten MUPTI. And has there been projects that received MUPTI but were not in the downtown plan area? And I can't really recall the boundaries of the downtown plan area. Like, for example, the Bennett's built a 4 or 5 story building that did get a MUPTI approval off of 13th, but I'm not sure if it's in the downtown plan area or not. Just kind of, I can't remember the boundaries exactly. I don't think the plan boundaries are necessarily coincidental with the MUPTI boundaries, and I get a little confused. So maybe you can clarify a little bit of that for me.
So your first question was along the lines of, would there be something that received a downtown efficiency measure but not MUPTI, or vice versa? And this, so we report downtown all together with the downtown plan, MUPTI, and urban renewal, but then we also break it out between just downtown plan area, just MUPTI, and just student housing. And so that shows that the numbers are a little bit different, but in this chart, if the permit received more than one incentive, then they are listed under each incentive here. But there you can see, obviously, there are more dwellings in the downtown plan area than have received MUPTI. And then, what did you ask?
If we can stay, maybe a follow-up question just on this particular graphic. So student housing, though, where we're showing that the blue essentially being the efficiency measure, is that correct?
Blue
commercial.
is the commercial plan designated land.
Okay, so by virtue of building housing on a commercially designated property, that's seen as an efficiency measure in and of itself?
No,
Okay, but that has been what's been happening with student housing projects, that all these towers have been built on commercially designated land. So they're included here in this. In what other respect, if not by virtue of building on commercial land, in what respect are they, has an efficiency measure facilitated that development?
so the student housing that's captured in the chart, and Heather, please jump in if I don't quite capture this, but this is specifically student housing that was built between, or that was permitted between January 1st of 13 and October 18th of 13, in order to capture the capstone development. So because
Capstone got it.
and
Okay,
that was
so-
because Heather, because that
Yeah.
would,
So
bucket.
it was, the beginning of our monitoring period is 2012, right? And MUPD happened to be going through a revamp right after we had done our buildable lands inventory in 2012. And so when we were trying to come up with an estimate of how many units, dwelling units, we needed to get downtown as an efficiency measure, it was well into 2013. It was like in October of 2013. And so we didn't want to say, we wanted to count those units as already being, they already were an efficiency measure because they were student housing that got MUPD in that era of MUPD before it was revamped. And so those numbers will never change. That's like a bucket of housing that got MUPD before MUPD was revamped. And then the other MUPD is, okay, MUPD got revamped in 2013. So after that, with the new version of MUPD, how many units did we get? And so it's a little bit confusing. I think it's confusing for us to explain, to have that student housing there. That's why we put the dates there, to be really like, this is an isolated bucket. We never have to revisit those numbers again, but we want to count them because they got MUPD. It was an efficiency measure at the time. So that's what that is about.
Okay, so just to be clear, that student housing that did get MUPD back when they could, and it's shown, you're not double counting it, it's shown in the student housing bucket, not in the downtown bucket, right? Or do I have that backwards?
It would
What-
not be double counted in
Mhm.
the one above, but here,
That's what it was.
yeah. That's where if you received multiple incentives, then it's only counted once. But here, this really is, if you were in the downtown plan boundary, regardless of what other incentives, if you were in MUPD downtown, regardless of whatever, and then in student housing. And I think Elena's write-up at the talks about that. It actually parses out the numbers for you so that you know how much in downtown that didn't get MUPD is actually quite a bit. And probably most of that was on commercial land. But it didn't get MUPD because I think some of that is housing on Franklin that you might call student housing. And so it couldn't get MUPD.
And some of those early 2013 MUPDs were the ones in the West University area. Some of those smaller, 8, 10, 12 units that got built in West University on residential. That's what the brown probably would represent in that bar. Rick.
Yeah, I guess I'm a little bit confused. Unless the downtown plan is larger than I remembered it being, I can't count 1,300 units being built between 2012 and 2022. Does that stretch more into the West University area than I remember? I thought it stopped at Pearl, or excuse me, High Street. And
The
this-
boundary itself, let's see. I don't have it up. But I mean, so for instance, and kind of talking about what Phil was saying, like 549 of, well, I'm not, no, never mind. Let me take that back for a second.
Well, maybe I didn't quite catch it. And maybe you could tell me again. So I'm looking at your chart under dwelling by efficiency measures and plan designation categories. It says downtown plan and it says that we've hit roughly 1,300 units. Did I hear you say that included the student housing that's in the last category?
It does, yeah. So if it was both had that student housing and was in the downtown plan area, it's going to be counted in each of them in this particular chart.
Oh, okay. I didn't pick up that that's what you were saying. I thought these were mutually exclusive categories.
They're not.
Mutually inclusive categories.
Yeah.
Okay. Then I would somehow suggest that you state that just real clear somewhere around the chart, maybe.
Okay. I did go into it, but I can probably make it more clear. I'll look at what
Okay.
I wrote.
Okay. Yeah, because I tried to count. And then my other question would be is, does this include the affordable housing projects that have been recently built? The ones that are on
Like the Nell
Carrollton and
and
11th and Lincoln and 11th?
they do. Yeah, the Nell and Katanji Court are both both of the permits for those buildings are included in these. in this.
So they would be included under efficiency measures because they're low income housing?
They
Because
just so
the city granted some funds for those projects.
yeah,
Yeah.
so I think I'm trying to remember which efficiency measures those
They got
received.
probably LRPTA and SDC waivers.
Mhm.
And they were in the downtown plan boundary, so they are gonna show up in multiple locations. This
They're
is really
commercially
about
zoned or designated
looking
too.
at the tool over, sorry, Phil. This is really about looking at each tool. And we do say, it's hard to read the text here, but we do say in multiple places,
Oops.
when the, that efficiency measures are counted in multiple locations. So yeah, it's tricky.
Okie dokie.
Okay, Phil and Rick, you still have your hands up, so lower them if you're not. Thank you.
So we skipped around a little bit. I'm gonna go back up to show these efficiency measures has affordable housing land bank sites, LRPD, low income rental housing property tax exemption, and then the redesignation to low density residential. And so you can see the dwellings that were built, the trend, and the forecast. So affordable housing land bank site is more than forecast at this point. There was no forecast for LRPD, but we are monitoring it. And then the redesignation to low density residential is very much below forecasts, but a large part of that is because a lot of that land is in the Crow Road area and doesn't have services yet, which is why it hasn't been developed.
Can I just add to that really quick? City Council adopted the recent capital improvement plan, and that does include serving the Crow Road area. So that's why we keep calling out the fact that it is a big part of our low density residential efficiency measure, but it needs services, and then that will allow it to annex for it to develop. So so there is movement in that area. So I just wanted to let you know about that.
Thanks. All right, and then sort of touched on downtown. And then we did do some manual analysis about some of the SDC credits, which includes both, it includes both exemptions and assistance for SDC. So as of January 2019, new transportation SDC credits for accessory dwelling units went into effect, and then SDC credits for affordable housing developments we calculated as well. So between 2013 and 2022, 523 net new affordable housing dwellings have been awarded SDC low-income housing exemptions totaling $2,376,475, and then an additional $95,000 of assistance towards SDE charges was awarded for 15 net new affordable housing dwellings. Bill.
Phil,
I'm not going to ask that this be included, but I'm just kind of curious. You've identified how much has been spent for these transportation SDC credits, which you can correlate easily to the number of units that have been developed that have taken advantage of that. Have you also calculated how many have applied but were not able to be funded for that? Question one. And question two is, have any projects not proceeded because of the inability to fully fund all of the requests for those transportation SDC credits or any others?
Those are community development questions that I can follow up on, but I don't know the answer to. I don't know if Heather does.
Yeah, we are actually, we didn't do, I think you might have brought up that question because during the comprehensive report, because those SDC credits, the mechanism for those SDC credits has a cap on it. And so, yeah, that I figured that might be what you were alluding to. And so the city can only grant the credits up to a certain amount and then they're not available anymore. And so I think you raised that and we have heard that question before. So we are looking into that. We, like you said, we won't have that for the annual report, but that's the kind of thing that when you talk about future efficiency measures, getting rid of that cap or raising that limit, that's the kind of information that would help inform whether that would be a smart move to see more development. So yeah, thank you.
one more question, back up a little bit.
Mhm.
The $2.3 million of low-income housing credits, is that the total over the 10-year or the 20 years that they get the credit for?
Is that the total? I mean, I believe so.
Or
But
is that 1 year's? I mean, there were quite a few that were granted, so it could be almost that in each year, but I just, that would be nice to know because it's the credit is a 20-year credit.
mhm.
And so if you're putting a number in there, you should allude to how long that, you know,
Well,
if that's
this
1
is-
year or that is
So-
that 20 years?
For SDC.
No, not the SDCs, the low income
Got
exemption.
it. Okay.
Oh, okay.
So for okay, I was on SDCs. So for
Yeah.
LRPD, that there is no
Go
total.
down a little bit. You'll see it. You costed it out at $2.376 million.
Those are SDC credits.
Although, no, low and additional. I thought 95,000. Oh, so 2 million was it SDC credits?
Yeah, so the 2.3 was for low income housing SDC exemptions,
Okay,
meaning they didn't have to pay their SDCs.
right.
And then we also gave $95,000 of assistance towards SDC charges, meaning they paid their SDCs, but we gave them the money to do that.
Okay, so that's over the whole period. That's over the
Yeah.
whole monitoring period then.
Correct, yeah.
Okay, all right. That's what I needed to know. Thank you.
Mhm. Bill,
Just a suggestion. I think, for purposes of the general public and anybody else, you can probably lose the sense on this thing and round
Yeah.
up or down.
okay, thanks. But I went through, so much to get those very specific totals. No. All right. So middle housing, and I did send an email out whenever that was, early February, I think, with some of these totals, because we were getting some requests to see those numbers from the public. And so just put this into a pretty simple chart for 2022, sort of pre-amendment and post-amendment numbers, but we know that a lot of these post-amendment numbers were for permits that were sort of already in the works before the code amendments were adopted. But just wanted to capture those totals. John.
Yeah, and this is just kind of for me geeking out because I was help put those code amendments into on the duplex dwellings.
Mhm.
Is there a way to break out whether they're attached duplexes or unattached duplexes? Because that was one of the big changes, and I would
There is.
beg to guess that the majority of them are going to be detached duplexes, and I think we'll start seeing more of these duplexes and less accessory dwelling units because the flexibility is there. So
Mhm.
if
And I think
that's
I-
broken out somewhere else, I'm sorry.
No, I don't think I included that level of detail in this. I did in the email that I sent to you. I did include sort of what configurations led to those. So was it a house that was building a second unit, or was it a new duplex, or was it a garage conversion? I think I went into that detail in the email, and that is something that we have data wise. But yeah, that we could go into greater detail in the annual report potentially as well, or so. Okay. All right, I'm going to move on to housing development buildable lands impact. So for the BLI impact on, again, general overview on low density residential was below pace, medium density residential on pace, high density residential above pace. And then commercial land above pace in terms of the number of dwellings and sort of on pace for the acreage of land developed. So this chart is dwellings by BLI category and plan designation. So any big numbers jumping out at me?
Can you make that a little bit bigger on the
Yeah,
screen, please?
let's see. Mhm. Is that a little better? So the total net new dwellings, 38% has been on developed land, 57% on vacant and partially vacant, as opposed to the forecast, which had 23% on developed land and 77% on vacant and partially vacant. So a lot more on developed than we were expecting. Let's see. All right. And you can see in this next chart, sort of the totals by each of the plan designations. So. All right. Keep moving forward. Then we have acres developed by BLI category and plan designation. So this is the total for all categories. And for new dwellings, a lot of it is on residential land, but we can break it up a little bit more. So this shows vacant, partially vacant, and developed. But again, most of this is on residential land as opposed to commercial, industrial, government, parks and open space. And then, so for low density residential, 21% of the forecast has been met. And for medium density residential, 28% of the forecast has been met. And then on high density residential, 89% of the forecast has been met, which was a little bit of a jump from last year, when it was at 73%. And a large chunk of the new acreage since the comprehensive plan was from an apartment complex called the Reserve, which was on almost 8 acres. So a lot of high density residential new dwellings. And then on commercial, we about 44% of the forecast has been met with 38 acres developed with new dwellings. And so then moving on to net density of dwellings, we kept it really high level. I didn't go into the overviews and takeaways, and I kind of just kept it, I included some of the charts, but kept it super high level because not a lot of the numbers the numbers really hadn't changed since the comp report. So highest net density is still on commercial plan designated land. Dwellings with 5+ dwelling units have a significantly higher net density than other structure types. The highest net density is on developed land, and development continues to be primarily on flat land. And so did include some of the averages. So yeah, commercials at 79. And then this is by housing subcategory. So 5+ is at around 77, as opposed to single unit, which is at 7.6. So nothing unexpected there, I guess. Any more questions about housing development? All right. Seeing none, we can move on to employment. Okay. Okay, so as I noted in the beginning here, the number and types of building permits for employment development and the industrial sites aren't defined as key data, but we kind of wanted to just include them. So the average number of employment permits over the monitoring period was 39 permits a year. You can see that here. And the commercial non-retail subcategory had the greatest number of permits, which is consistent with what we reported in the comprehensive report. And then there still are no large industrial site developed, but just wanted to include those charts for you. So going into employment development efficiency measures, there is also a downtown program. Did I see your hand? No. Okay.
Yes.
Oh, yeah. Oh, you're muted, Rick. Rick.
Sorry, pushing wrong buttons. On the large lot industrial, is that due to the fact that Clear Lake hasn't received infrastructures to be able to be developed?
Yeah,
And-
so I note that here, large industrial sites are identified as outside of or within the Clear Lake UGB expansion area. So
Oh, okay. Sorry, I missed that.
So these are within the UGB expansion area, and some are in and some are out, basically. But that's part of the reason.
Yeah, I think that's a good takeaway. I mean, we just saw that on the residential lands, and we saw it now on the industrial lands, that lands that are brought in to the BLI or the employment land category, if they're not served by infrastructure, the chances that they're going to be developed in the way that we hope they would just doesn't materialize. That's kind of the takeaway that I see from these two charts.
Yeah, and we didn't run that analysis again about for the comprehensive report, we reran the buildable lands inventory, and we checked how many acres in each plan designation were annexed and how many weren't, and what that ratio was. And it was almost half of our buildable land supply in acres and in capacity. One was a little bit more and one was a little bit less, but it are unannexed, which doesn't exactly equate to services, but whether or not it has services, so it could be unannexed and there could be services that would allow it to annex, but just using that as a proxy, that was a pretty big amount. And I think that's something when we rerun our BLI this time, we will want to keep an eye on that, because that would be an efficiency, is to find more ways to serve our buildable land supply. So
Yeah, that was kind of where I was getting to, is could we use building out infrastructure as an efficiency measure going forward?
we will be looking at that when we get there. There are new rules being worked on right now that are going to, as drafted, would be moving in that direction, but or a new bill that would tell us to make those rules that would allow us to move in that direction. So there's definitely, it's not just a Eugene issue, it's an Oregon issue, and they are trying to make it so that we can count those kinds of actions as efficiencies.
i.e., so if, like you said, like if it is identified in the CIP as funding identified, that could be listed as an efficiency measure, maybe.
Yeah.
Okay.
It kind of I don't know what stage you would have to be at to call it an efficiency measure, but yeah.
Rick.
Just for clarity, the chart says within UGB expansion areas, and I could assume that that's already UGB expansion areas. And then the ones outside are outside current expanded areas.
So
Yeah, so that that might have been a poor choice of words on our part. So the outside the UGB expansion area means it was within the UGB area before we expanded. And then within the UGB expansion area is Clear Lake. It's the area where we expanded the UGB to include the Clear Lake and parks and school area. So we might want to change that outside UGB expansion area, because that almost sounds like it's even further away.
right.
Yeah, it's like before UGB expansion area, before UGB expansion or something like that.
And I assume the categories as far as acreage size is gross areas, not usable areas.
Yeah, I believe so.
I would have to go back to the UGB analysis. That is all covered in the UGB analysis that was adopted. I don't remember. I think it was usable area.
Okay.
I don't, because that was what these size classifications were. They were saying we need a 10 to 19 acre buildable site. And so I'm
Correct.
pretty sure it excluded like wetland areas that were protected.
Okay, I just wanted to confirm that because that's something that we did do during those expansion discussions.
Yep, this is that same analysis. Now
Okay.
we're monitoring it. Yep.
Okay.
Okay. So employment development efficiency measures include downtown programs, the E1 and the E2 zones, redesignation to commercial, brownfield assessment. And let's see. overall, the efficiency measures for employment development were definitely not utilized as much as they were for housing. On the most used efficiency measure was the enterprise zone, which actually wasn't on a formally adopted efficiency measure. So we're capturing and monitoring that. But it isn't, there's no forecast for that. Okay, let's see. So this is acres developed with employment efficiency measures by plan designation category and use. So there were on commercial land, or sorry, yes, on commercial land, there are about 26 acres forecast, and we've only seen 7 develop. And then on industrial, there was 103 for commercial. We've seen 26 develop, and there were 45 forecast on industrial land with industrial uses, and we've seen 15 develop. So all of those are sort of less than expected or forecast at this point. John.
Yeah, just on the page before, one of the takeaways was about the 12 acres permitted for Shepherd Motors. And that was E2 that got reclassified to commercial. So it wasn't built to E2 standards. How does that fall into hitting the efficiency?
E2, sorry, I'm just trying to process what you said.
John, that went from E1 to E2, which allowed them to build the car
was it?
dealership.
Okay.
And that was in effect, E2 was in effect as of June 2014.
Okay.
So. Keep going?
Yep.
Okay. Okay, and then it breaks things down by efficiency measure. So this is commercial, all commercial land. And so the enterprise zone, 1 acre with commercial uses, 2-ish acres with industrial uses, and then 0 acres with the redesignation to commercial. Going. And then this is also still commercial uses. In the downtown plan area, there have been 4 acres developed with commercial uses, and then 0 acres in both of the urban renewal areas. Okay. And then this is industrial land. We have brownfields assessment, which is 0 acres have been developed. I did add a footnote here. We had put that in the comp report that we didn't have any more funding for the brownfields assessments. But I talked with someone in community development recently, and we're actually not eligible to apply for that funding through the federal government yet. I think there's a certain number of years that you have to wait if you've already been awarded some. And so once we are eligible, I think they're hoping in the next few years we will apply for that again, but there isn't any funding available to us at the moment. And I added that in a footnote. E1, 1 acre, E2, about 13 acres. And I did note that a large chunk of that is the Shepherd Motors development. And then the enterprise zone, both commercial and industrial uses, totaled, I forgot.
Does the farmer's market not count as commercial, even though it's government owned? That's that's in the downtown urban renewal agency, and that's what built it. I mean, it has employment, obviously.
Right.
Did the what? I didn't hear what you.
Farmer's market.
Market.
And you asked whether or not that would be considered a
In
commercial
urban,
use.
employment efficiencies using urban renewal.
We would have to go back and look. I think that would have been under government uses, not commercial or industrial. 'Cause it's
Lisa, then
government.
Phil.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I just had a question about the brownfields.
Mhm.
Could you please make it a little bigger?
Yeah.
Tiny, thank you. Great. So I know that the city of Eugene has gotten was 3 brownfield grants. Do you happen to know, Elena?
I'm not sure how many we had, but we did have them.
At least 2, maybe 3. So is this is showing okay, well, this is showing just assessments, right? Not,
And this is showing acres developed.
so,
You after, I mean, I guess I'm assuming after the brownfields assessment procedure occurred.
okay, so 45 have been or forecasted?
45 is the forecast. So that's what it's expected through between 2012 and 2032. We projected there would be about 45 acres, and currently there's been 0.
So I know this is, not a project you've worked on, just
Mhm.
remarkable that a lot of grant money was poured into that and there's been 0 acres developed. Just making an observation,
Yeah,
and I kind of don't understand it.
right. And right. So just because acres haven't developed, that doesn't mean the assessments haven't happened. They have, because we've had the money. But I don't know the background or any other anecdotal information about why they haven't developed.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Yeah, but cleaned up.
Bill.
Yeah, I was just gonna ask again, relating to the brownfields. I thought that maybe what happened is not that there's no funding any longer for these brownfield assessments, but that now it has to be administered through LCOG instead of the city. I don't know
I
if that's
think that
correct.
I think that is true. The LCOG is administering it. I don't know if they were before or not, but they
No.
are. But I know. I don't know if those are 2 separate things. I also know we aren't able to apply for funding right now.
And even if the LCOG administered it, we would still count it as an
Mhm.
efficiency measure, because the UGB analysis said these lands are not considered redevelopable because because we have 45 acres that no one's assuming will redevelop, at least 45 acres that no one's assuming will redevelop without assistance to clean it up, or to do an assessment that it actually isn't dirty, like whatever. But that there needs to be some review of the site and then potentially clean up. And so that's what that's about. Even if it gets administered by LCOG, it's still about investing in the ability to redevelop that land.
Also, this is the only forecast that we made for brownfields assessment was for on industrial land with industrial uses. And so I think there are some acres developed with the brownfield assessment, but they may be industrial with commercial uses or commercial land with commercial uses. And not knowing, when I looked at the data, I think there were some, I think it was relatively minimal, but we're not capturing those as efficiency measures because we didn't have an adopted forecast for those other plan designations and uses.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was gonna mention as a follow-up to Lisa's comment, because I know we had gotten some brownfield funds to do some environmental assessment, and it was developed residentially.
Yeah.
So it's just not going to be captured here under this employment land analysis.
Mhm.
Howard, you're up.
Yeah, I thought the former eWeb property, the riverfront development, was a brownfield site. There certainly was contamination that had to be cleaned up before any development could occur, from hydrocarbons and old gas plant and all that kind of stuff. So is that captured anywhere?
My guess is no, because again, it wouldn't be an industrial use on
so.
industrial land.
Well, I think historically you could say because they were converting coal to gas. So I thought, it might have been a government thing, but it certainly was an industrial process historically. But anyway, it seems
Yeah,
you ought to get credit for, what historical land use was there and the subsequent cleanup.
I think that this is great. I'm making a note about, again, future follow-up during the next UGB analysis is that we have the data now, even if it's not in this chart, that shows where brownfield development of what was perceived as a brownfield site has happened. And so when we're looking again at efficiency measures and ways to spur redevelopment, we don't have to just look at industrial land. This is specifically focused on industrial land because that's where we had the deficit when we did the UGB analysis. So this was like, we don't have enough big industrial sites inside the UGB, so we're going to plan for 45 acres to be cleaned up through a brownfield program. We're going to plan for, these different efficiency measures. We ended up still needing to expand the urban growth boundary to complete the need, but that's the process. And so what we can do is take this information that's behind these charts and isn't shown here when we're doing the next UGB analysis and say, okay, well, actually, we've seen development on with brownfield money or assessment that resulted in housing. It resulted in commercial along the riverfront. And so we can use that as an efficiency measure going forward.
Yeah, just anecdotally, one more. The first big apartment complex on Franklin Boulevard was on a brownfield. That was a Chevron station that was designated as a brownfield.
So does the city have much experience historically in redeveloping brownfield sites as far as directing that, or has it been more of a private sector initiative to clean up sites? And then I guess another question is just throwing something out there is I kind of wonder what will happen to the Baxter wood treatment site if it doesn't wind up as a Superfund site. Is that property being looked at as a potential brownfield redevelopment? Probably not, certainly for residential, but could be some kind of industrial use that was compatible with residential areas and adjacent areas.
I don't know the answer to your first question. I think we help facilitate money to make them happen, but I don't know that the city has is actually more involved than that.
Yeah, I'm just curious, since there's not a lot, no offense, but there doesn't seem to be a lot of environmental expertise, at least among city staff in that area. So that's why I was kind of curious about that.
Yeah,
We're not a developer.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. And as far as the Baxter property, I guess I don't know. I guess that's too far in the future to think.
I do not know.
Okay.
No, but this will be all good conversation when we start looking at efficiency measures.
All right. So lastly is employment development and the buildable lands impact. So see, this chart shows the annual average acres developed by BLI category and plan designation with new development. So you can see that the forecast in industrial was pretty high, and the averages have not been that high. And on commercial, they haven't quite caught up with them either. Howard, did you have a question again? Maybe not. Okay. Let's see. Yeah, so there were 57 acres forecast on industrial, and only 13.2 acres have developed, and then 12.9 for commercial and 6.7 have developed. So, well, the annual average. Let's see, and then breaks down further the percent of need met. So this shows total for residential, commercial, industrial, etc. But then we'll break it down even more. Let's see. So actually, let me jump back up here. So the total for all categories here with employment development over the monitoring period was 1,457 acres, and so far 336 have been developed with employment.
Wow.
development. And so then, yes, this breaks it down. What page? By plan designation. So there's been a little bit on vacant, but definitely nowhere near meeting the forecasts. And really, the new a lot of that new employment development on vacant land has been on residential. Let's see. And these numbers haven't changed a lot since the comprehensive report either. So 26% of the need on commercial has been developed so far. And only 12% of the industrial need has been met so far. And then there has been, so we didn't have a forecast for government and education. But there was about 65 acres developed, and most of those were for schools and some park facilities. And then for parks, we had reported 12 acres in the comprehensive report from mid-2021. Now there have been 26 acres by the end of 2022. 8 of those acres were for the new Cascade Middle School. Again, there's no forecast.
And one thing I just wanted to mention about that, because it shows a really small amount on developed and then a really big amount on committed land. So those are our buildable lands inventory categories, and a lot of the committed land was school land, right? And so it was developed, but it was committed to public uses. And so it ended up, that's how it gets classified. Committed overrides the category of developed. And so, a lot of those schools had big acreages. And you all may know this going around town, a lot of those schools replaced a school that was already there. And so those acres are really big and committed, but there, 8 acres being redeveloped, that really was 8 acres of developed committed land. So I just wanted to point that out because it seems, I don't know, it's just interesting because developed looks so small, but it's just a reminder that committed land is either parks or it's school land, which oftentimes is developed with schools and the public and its facilities. So
All right, and then there was a forecast for some new employment development on vacant residential land, both in low, medium, and high density residential. But you can see low density residential it has been very little. Medium density residential has gone up to, has met 93% of that forecast. And then high density residential is about at 43% of the forecast need. So there's been some development on residential, but not a lot. All right, anything anyone would like me to go back to? Okay, let me stop sharing. I can figure out how. Okay.
Right. Phil.
Can I ask a question following up on Heather's comment? Yeah, interesting to see how the school district has been pretty artful about, as they needed to replace a school, they'll knock down the old school, build into the playground, and then the old school site becomes the playground or something like that. And otherwise, there's been certain times where demographics have changed and they've consolidated schools, things like that. Does the school district have any official plan for like their space needs that the city has ever, relied upon or incorporated into your planning as well? And I know they've got some land bank, basically sites for new schools, but do they have an actual plan? That I know the university, I worked on a project that tried to determine that the university had an adequate amount of land for their future growth needs, but the school district does too?
yeah, so when we, and this is going in the way back, because it would have been before 2012 when we coordinated with them, but when we did the UGB planning, we checked with them, one, on if they had any land that they were going to surplus, because that would go, especially if it was vacant, or partially vacant, it would go back into our buildable lands inventory. So we'll do that again with the next UGB analysis. And then we do check with them on what their future needs are. And there's a lot of kind of back and forth, because they're like, well, where are we going to grow? How many people are we going to, and so there is quite a bit of that. I know that for the UGB expansion, they, in accordance with state law, actually had to develop a specific type of document or plan documenting their needs to justify the expansion for the school property out by Clear Lake and the park. So there are actually specific requirements. Similarly with the park, expanding for the park, we used their adopted plan that showed the need. So we definitely do coordinate. I can't say whether, what their plan looks like right now. What I remember was more of a conversation back and forth, because at the time, they were actually not wanting to buy more property, given where, like you said, demographics were projected to be back in 2010 through 2012 when we were looking at those estimates. So it seems kind of fluid, but again, that's that's probably old information, but we'll need to circle back with them and take that into account, just like we will with U of O. You know, understanding what their plans are when we do our UGB planning.
Yeah, and the same as with the public entities, what's it, the PPF?
Public facilities plan.
Yeah, so you know what EWEB has planned used for, what the city has planned used for, what all those are in there and as committed lands, basically, even if they're sitting empty, unless they're surplus. Other questions or comments? Well, I just want to say that this all is just fabulous information, and this is going to make the next round of UGB analysis so much, I don't want to say easier because there's so much data to go into, but I think it's going to make it so much more defined and help us really make a really informed decision, because we have such solid data to look at. We can say this efficiency, we thought it would work, it's really not working, but this one is working gangbusters. So, you know, we might want to use this one instead of that one. And I think this is really exciting for a set of tools. So thank you to you guys for putting this together and making it clear for the regular people with you know, the condensed version, but also making the deep dives so that people on our committee and the policymakers can go to the appendices and prove, you know, show their work, right? Instead of just saying, oh yeah, let's do this. You're going to be able to show your work next time. So thank you very much.
That's a great, thank you for that. And thank you all for digging in. We need that, and it's great questions, and sometimes we can't answer all the questions in the meeting. So we appreciate your patience. That's a great segue to next steps. I don't have UGB analysis on here, but as you know, we updated the bylaws to make it clear that this group would be looking at the technical analysis for the next UGB analysis. So Thea has already begun pulling the data needed. She's already pulled the data needed for the buildable lands inventory redo. So we did that for the comprehensive report. We're doing it again, updating it again. And so I think that we will be bringing the updated BLI back to this group as soon as we're done with the annual report. So we haven't, you know, we've been bringing you sections of what would be the appendices if we were updating all of the appendices right now, but we still need to bring you that annual report card. And so we can have more of another conversation. We brought you some ideas early on, and we'll, you know, circle back and talk about how to make sure the annual report is in a digestible format. We're still trying to figure that out. So, you know, and we appreciate your patience too with this. We weren't sure how, you know, if updating the appendices, but only sections of the appendices was the right way to do this. We might do it differently next year. So, you know, we're muddling through, but yeah, that, I think that is anticipated. I think the next couple meetings will, I think we're going to cancel the first week April meeting. We'll keep the normal, you know, a month from now, April meeting on the calendar, with the thought that we would bring you the report. It may only be part of the report, or it may be the whole thing, since it's supposed to be pretty small. But as you guys know, sometimes it takes a long time to synthesize things. Sometimes it's actually easier to say a whole bunch of things. So that, I think it'll be interesting challenge, at least for myself, to not be wordy and really focus on the key issues. So that will be either April and May, the third weeks. or potentially just May. So, but keep those 2 dates on your calendars. There was a discussion, I think at the last meeting, there were a couple folks that brought up, and I think we've heard this before, when are we going to be meeting in person? Could we send out a doodle poll? So what we didn't want it to get lost in these meeting materials because they were pretty lengthy, but we'll be sending out an email to get your feedback. We're just going to ask you a couple of questions about meeting in person and also meeting hybrid. You know, how's it going? You know, do you have suggestions? I think, or not hybrid, but virtual. So we'll send those out probably either tomorrow or early next week. That email specifically getting your feedback on that. I don't think we would be meeting every time, something quarterly or something like that. Elena, do you want to talk about ETAC recruitment real quick?
Sure. The recruitment for all of the city's boards and commissions opened on March 1st and goes through March 31st. And we can be a little bit flexible on the number of positions we may appoint to ETAC, since we updated the bylaws to have between 10 and 15 people. We posted for 3 vacancies, but we'll see. Hopefully we get some applicants that fill out our group. I've reached out to some of the organizations that have been represented on this committee before, and so I'll keep you posted.
And just for clarification, that's a city manager appointed
It is.
position.
Mhm.
I think, yeah, we jumped over the last piece on next steps, that the annual report is kind of the next. I'll double check. I don't think that I put other data as a bullet, like if there was any other data we needed that we had identified as key data to report on annually. I don't think there was any, but we need to just go back and double check. But other than that, the next thing you should see is a draft report.
All right. Anybody else have anything for the good of the order? All right, Tiffany, I got us out half an hour early. There's your goal.
I know, it's a high bar. Thanks,
All
John.
right. Everybody go out and enjoy the last hour of sunshine. Thank you for attending.
Thank you, everyone. Appreciate your time.
Bye.